Welcome to the 11th episode of the Interstice podcast. And I want to start by saying thank you so much to everyone who wrote in over the last week. It's starting to really pick up speed now, the number of questions I have, which gives excellent ammunition to the podcast for the second half. Thanks wherever you're tuning in, whether that's iTunes or on Spotify or here on the channel. That's awesome. I suddenly realize I feel a little bit naked here. I don't even have a pen or my book with me, but that's fine. I'll gesticulate. That'll work. So I've recently, as anyone who's listening to the podcast well knows, is going on right now. I'm moving, and that's meant spending a little more time, a little extra special time with my friend Neil, who is like a Wunder teacher. He's really amazing. He has an excellent command of the language. And in fact, that's one of the reasons I've been spending time with him, is because he's been helping me, particularly with getting my internet set up at the new place. But we have good conversations. We also play D&D together. He's our DM right now. He's doing a great job. Bang up job, Neil. I don't think he'll ever listen to this, but that's okay. And after we finished with our getting stuff done, getting all the internet handled, we talked about teaching for a little bit. And the topic that we were discussing was classroom management. I think classroom management is it's like a great professionally euphemistic word for the like challenges, kids being incredibly difficult, monitoring your anger, not using, as I thought Neil described really well. He said to never use your anger as a weapon, and only as a carefully apportioned tool to conduct the class. And the sort of ways that students react differently depending on the ages that they have, and the sort of dynamic that you need to work out for yourself personally that will work or not work well in the class. And it led to some really interesting perspectives, I thought. So he and I's approach vary like a great deal from each other, which is cool because I like to observe that there is not one particular way that you have to do this. There can be a couple ways. And I definitely think that I arrived to this after some time, because until you are challenged, until you face something that's difficult, like with all things in life, you're not going to grow because there's no cause to grow. It's, I guess that's sort of like evolutionarily, when you look at something and why it is adapted, it's in the face of some sort of adversity. Now, this year, I have no problem saying it was an incredibly difficult year. I had, in last year, I had a very, very difficult class, but then very, very strange, where I thought that was kind of the height of how difficult it would be. And I got through that just fine. And it was more a kind of question of energy levels being high than it was negativity. And as long as the class isn't negative, then there's not quite an urgency to address it, because sure, kids are going to be energetic, but there's it's a totally different beast. Suffice it to say, without going into detail about that class in the previous year, I want to talk about the one that I have this year and the sort of kind of epiphanies and awakenings I had to my skill set. I would say in a classroom, managing your like anger, your response to things being disruptive. And this class this year, they were so different. I think that's where the story begins most appropriately, and where it's kind of fascinating from an objective standpoint is that certainly they were not exceptional. This class was not going to get any awards for how apt they were at acquiring the language, but that's fine. Not every class is. But then come the second year, come this year, where they'd gone from the grade they are in now to the following, they changed so much. and in a really, really, really negative way. And there were two classes. And one of the classes, it was interesting for me to note, where at first they were, in the previous year, they were not so good, but then we got this brand new teacher to the school, and when she took the helm, when she took the wheel, as it were, they totally changed, and it was great evidence for me of how much you can influence a child and how much they change depending on their influences. And I wonder by extension how much adults change by their influence. Obviously much more when you're a child, but wow, was it was incredibly significant to me. But that was dealt with, basically. This new teacher came in, and I got to see how a class that was somewhat of a challenge, as long as they had a good homeroom teacher, then they were going to be far better off. And it wasn't a problem. And in fact, it was a celebration. And I got to see how these kids improved given the correct leadership, and I really enjoyed being with them. But this other class, they were, I should say, because the end of this story is a happy one. They're little hellions. They were so difficult. And I'd never, in the whole time that I'd ever taught, had people say to my face during the course of a lesson that I hate this. I hate what we're doing. I hate English. And then when I would hear them discuss amongst themselves, if they were doing an activity, not all of them, but some of them, using the Japanese word for hell, saying that this was a hell that they were in. And I've disliked school before. I mean, on some level, I understood where these kids were coming from, but it was more around the time that where I was a little bit more adolescent and there were more things to consider, where these kids are in elementary school, and I thought you would at least get a few more years that you were not so jaded and so angry, but they were this way, and I had to figure out what to do. And for me, it was an incredible journey of self-discovery. So at first, I suppose you might say that I had kind of a traditional way to handle things, which if somebody was incredibly disruptive, or in this case, incredibly rude, then I would bring the class to a stop. I would call attention to this child, and I would address what they were doing. And not ever in a truly uncontrolled way. That's a lie. There were a few times where I got quite angry, but for the most part, for the most part, not in any kind of uncontrolled way. But I would raise my voice. I would be angry. I would discipline the kids. By the way, this is not something that I should necessarily even have been doing. It falls to the homeroom teacher to do this, but the homeroom teacher was not taking charge of her class, and had I said nothing, then this would continue until the class's any semblance of progress was lost and these kids were out of control completely. But I found there was a couple things that I noticed right away when I looked at it from this approach, was that, first of all, for these kids who are in their current mindset, they're hell-bent on causing disruption, that in some sense they have succeeded because they've unseated your calm control of the class, and so they can feel like they got their they got their role, they got what they wanted. And of course, naturally, that feels like a loss for me because, well, now where the whole point is to get the course back on track, you've now added to whatever score is being kept that indicates you don't have control of the class, and that these kids who are disrupting it and who are angry are able to have a significant influence on it. So not only that, and I think the thing that most mattered to me when I looked at this was that, of course, in these classes, it's not all of the kids who are doing this. It's usually, 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 at a stretch in a class of about 25. And so the large majority of the kids are either doing nothing wrong or are simply being influenced by these kids who are acting up. And so when you raise your voice, it felt horrible because these kids have done nothing wrong. They know that they haven't done anything wrong, but that doesn't protect them from the sort of trauma which is listening to someone speak really angrily. Anybody who's watching or listening to this now, you don't need to be the object of someone's anger to know how truly uncomfortable that is. And in my lifetime, I've been party to situations many times when I was younger where that was the case. I wasn't the one who was in trouble, but I listened to people scream and yell at each other, and it was horrible. It's I wouldn't want to change anything because that's grown me into the man I am today. But is there a different way that you can do this? Yes, absolutely there is. And so my thought was, I've got to get control of this class, but I've got to do it in such a way that if I were to discipline or if I am to correct it, that discipline isn't inflicting a suffering on anyone who doesn't deserve it. And so for me, in the end, well, actually, I should also add that people are also different how they react to their own anger, and where I would, as carefully as I could, dole out this anger, dole out this raise in my voice, but I don't know, again, who's listening, who's watching, who has a similar experience to this, but I'm quite highly keyed in to my, call it like adrenal response, or like, call it like your fight or flight. And so if I start to go down this road, if I have raised my voice, even in a measured way, then I'm going to get a strong adrenal response, and it's almost got me shaking. You know, you're ready to run a marathon. You're ready to like tear the head off a lion, whatever you got to do to survive. And let me tell you, that's not exactly conducive to returning to a fun, engaging class atmosphere afterwards. It's like, I've seen teachers do this, where it seems to me that when I see them do it, they can measure out their anger in such a way that there is no adrenal response. There is no fight or flight. And so one moment they're tearing a chunk off of a kid and they're disciplining them. And then the very next, they're laughing and smiling at the front of the class. And that works for some people. It does not work for me. I'm not that guy. I can't come down from anger like that, even allowing myself to experience it in a very measured way. So I had to think, what is a way that I can get control of this class again, where I can do away with this? And the answer ultimately is quite simple. It's that as opposed to disciplining, it was a question of charisma and confidence, where what they would do, they would continue to behave in the sort of a disruptive way that I've described, but I would give basically anti-attention and make the goal be that I were so engaging and so much more interesting to follow along with and observe that helplessly kids who may have been influenced by these negative forces in the classroom are now being carried along by what I'm doing at the front of the class. And it's kind of a wink and a nudge to, come on, like I'm cool enough that I'm not gonna raise my voice, but you should just know there's this energy of what we're doing in here. It's interesting, it's engaging. Even if you don't like it, you wouldn't disrupt it because that's cool. So it might sound kind of funny, but I had eventually opted to overwhelm them with coolness, with confidence. And it really did work. And it worked in a number of different ways. So not saying in order of importance, but one of the things that I touched on to begin with that is really obviously important is that now when these kids were disrupting the class, they didn't get any more stake in it by having made me upset or having stopped the class for their distractions. And so in that classic way, when the best thing you can do is ignore someone who's being negative, that's exactly what I was doing. I was ignoring their negativity and focusing on being positive. And so it disempowered those voices in the class and it disempowered their influence. And It was a fascinating thing to watch, just like in the other class that I've described, where with enough leadership, the kids fell into line. I think it is only the rarest, and usually I would go out on a limb and say, I don't think there are bad kids. There's bad influences. And if you can influence them positively enough, and I'm not saying this is any small feat, it's a real challenge, and this pushed me to develop myself and my confidence and the flow of my class even more to achieve this. But once they started to be positively influenced, there's one girl specifically, not naming names, I keep this all for privacy's sake, whatever I got to do here, but one of the girls who specifically called the class hell now frequently says hello to me in the hallways. And it was one of those things where I'd felt like I was reining it back in the correct direction, but I didn't know it was that good. It made me feel amazing to have succeeded, not only in just, I would be happy if the class would progress with less interruption, let alone that clearly the relationships of the students and myself were being repaired in the class to have chosen the path that I had. So maybe not for everyone, but I definitely learned that if you are one of these people like myself who has an adrenal response, who has like a very strong fight or flight when you're going to be conducting a lesson or conducting a lecture, far better the path to go down if you have this asset available to you is that of charisma and confidence. And I feel like it's a positive feedback loop in the sense that the reason that you're confident is because you've probably planned your lesson better. For example, things that like really set me on edge, like if I drink way too much coffee, I get quite manic, so I cut that out so I would have a greater even energy. The even energy meant that I get better sleeps at night. So actually improving the state of this class improved the state of my entire life. And it was great as well to see an example where you did not have to rely on classic discipline, because when it gets right down to it, it's like the last thing in the world that I want to do. And not that I don't think that it has its place, but to have an alternative which essentially accomplishes the same thing is wonderful. And that's like, it's not even saying weak teachers are deadly. Weak teachers cause these students, as I've now described, to basically warp because they don't understand the limits, they aren't engaged enough, whatever it might be. So there is a pitfall. I don't think that you should discipline needs to be there in some way, but I think you can arrive at it through a number of different styles, as I said at the start, because I think it could be easy to internalize what I'm talking about and think about this like, oh, well, then discipline is out the door. No, I'm still in this kind of weird, like anti-discipline way. I am still disciplining the class, but it's by a different approach. There is never a point where you do not need to be a strong personality to command the attention of a group of people. Now, it doesn't matter if that's a bunch of elementary school students or junior high or senior, or for some work event, there is absolutely no space, no room that if you want your voice to be heard, to be weak. So you need to address it however you personally can. Now, it was interesting to me. I could see this was the other part of the discussion that I had with Neil that was interesting to me, because I could see how it was also there, like I'm talking about personality type, where he so connects with where the children are in their age and how much he knows that they classically, when children are young, they're kind of pushing against barriers and they want to know where they are. And so he has no issue with a measured amount of anger, which I think works very, very well for him. So if the class is being too unruly, if it's spiraled out to chaos, then he may take a moment in the class and explain to them in a stern voice never yelling, anything like that, but drive them back to pay attention to whatever it is that he was doing. Whereas it's simply something that I wouldn't do, but I think it's from my mentality is that I usually, this sounds like a strange thing because even as a mentor, I usually place myself as someone's peer. I know that sounds strange a little bit because how can you be a mentor and a peer? But I'm trying to extend to that person always the sense of, if you will come up to my level, now that sounds somewhat condescending, but when you're dealing with younger people, that's essentially what it is. If you can come up to my level, I'll treat you in the same way. And I'm then holding you to that standard. So now we're peers, but you're only a peer so long as you can maintain that standard of behavior, which is a slight difference from always establishing that you are a mentor and they are in a student role. One is a student, but a student that you've brought up to peer level. And I know that sounds incredibly strange. I suppose it does have its cutoff point. I do this probably up into, I think the cutoff would be something around grade 4 in elementary school. The children genuinely past that time, I would not do this same method, and I would likely do something more akin to what Neil's doing because they're just little they're so mentally undeveloped that it's easier also to corral them, much as it is herding cats. It's easier to corral their behavior, but there's something that critically changes when they get a little bit older. And then that sort of behavior, I feel like, has to fade away because now that they're looking at you also like they want to be a peer. Not so much. They still look to you as a mentor, but there is much more a degree found in kids that age that is, hey, I'm maturing now and I've got real interests and I've got real thoughts and I've got real problems. And so some desire, whether clearly stated or not, that you would respect them back. And I find when people reach that stage that it works very, very well for me. And I have no issue with that. And is another reason that I'm actually looking forward to the coming year, because I'll be in a junior high school. And of course, where that's what I had actually worked previously when I came to Japan, that's what I'll be returning to now. And those personalities, when you get to junior high school, I mean, they really are children, I think, at a very early age, far earlier than we give them credit for, are essentially adult. And I think you would say this of them, even if you looked like neurologically at them in terms of like the way that the brain creates a bunch of extra connections and then as we mature prunes them down, that their brains start to look not so dissimilar from an adult mind. And all they are is adults who haven't yet wrecked their lives. Or to put it a different way, that don't have any experience. And so they have all the mental capacity and an incredible sharpness, probably an edge, in fact, over any adult because they're so quick-witted that age. But so little experience that they will need a mentor. They will need somebody to look to give them guidance, give them. This is where the other part of our conversation turned to the discussion of like, what essentially is education for? And we both agreed. I thought that was interesting because I really didn't know. We'd not had this conversation before, but essentially, especially at these levels, an education, it's important, whatever specific little details it is that you're teaching them, they'll hopefully retain that, but it's more their experience of learning, because when we get older, hopefully what we're going to pursue is our passion. And that's what we're going to in our, whatever it is, university education pursue. But you'll only pursue that if your relationship with learning is a positive one. And that's why I feel like your experience or their experience of an English class could actually be why they so enjoy whatever it is that they go on to do, whether that be a geneticist or business or an astronaut, whatever it is, a veterinarian, who knows, a writer. But they so enjoyed that experience of learning that then they knew what a feeling of good learning was like. And so when they came to their passions for the first time and realized, oh, this is something I really want to pursue, well, I had so much fun with the process of what it's like to pursue something that is challenging. Now I'm going to apply it to what I truly love, and let's see where that takes me. So that wraps it up. I didn't say it at the beginning, but of course, since I had that great landslide of questions coming to me, if you want to get your questions answered on the podcast, please do write me at davetrippanon@gmail.com, and they will be answered in the second portion of the podcast, which is what we are going to move into now. Let's dive into these emails and get started. So the first one is from Dave. He is a patron, so thank you very much, Dave. And this is a quite extensive email, nothing wrong with that. But I've actually browsed through this so that we can make it a little bit more concise. We can get right down to the point of it. So David's essentially writing me to ask about being older and teaching here. And I've said this before, that there is ageism here. Absolutely, which I think exists anywhere in the world for any job at the more entry level that you go into it. But I would then say as well that I can confidently say that demand far exceeds prejudice in this case. And so there are so many teachers that are needed. The fact that you are a little bit older is no problem. You're going to be able to find something. So then to go on to that, where the question that David had here is that, what do you think about using the ALT shitty job to like do the Japanese thing, move up and move on? And I think that this is a fantastic thing to do. And I would say it's not only good for the foreseeable reasons that you would do it, like I'm going to do this because I'll get into a better job, I'll get promoted, I'll find, some sort of way to become affluent and wealthy and rich. Not so much the money thing, but that you're going to find like stepping stones onto something better. A lot of it can be once you've started to network and once you've gotten here and you get an idea of the landscape, that you are inspired to do whatever else. And for somebody like yourself, David, if you're listening to this, maybe it is even reading the background here, lots of university experience, a couple of prestigious public universities in Thailand, experience teaching over in Nanjing, China, really interesting stuff. Perhaps if it's your gig and you've done it for long enough now, maybe consider doing something like a distance master's, and then you could absolutely get into a university here. And then who knows who you meet and network with and whatever that becomes. So I would never want to bury somebody's head in the sand, let alone my own, regarding this topic of ageism and the increased challenge that you will have as someone who is older and applying for jobs like this. But in no way does it need to be prohibitively difficult. So thank you very much for your email there, David. So moving along, let's go. This is Dear Mr. Trippin. I do enjoy when people refer to me as that. I also was going to say, if you guys are listening to this, it's really cool for me. I like hearing where you're from. So let me know where you're writing from. I've had somebody just recently say, hey, all the way from new patron, actually, all the way from Norway. That's really cool. I got Norwegian background. So let's read. Hello, I am Ali, a mathematician from Iraq who just won a scholarship to study in Japan at Kyoto University. That's really cool. Congratulations, Ali. And I am SATing in Japan for, staying probably in Japan for at least 5 years. My first language is Arabic, and I have 2 years of experience as an interpreter for the U.S. Army. This is wild. This is interesting. Crazy stuff, Ali. And 4 years as an English instructor, my own English center. I've been teaching the new Headway English course and give myself level C1. Do you think that I can get a part-time job as an English teacher? Yes, Ali. We could have summed this up a lot easier. Yeah, certainly. Of course you could. I mean, especially I think as a student, you're even allowed to have a minimal amount of work that if you wanted to, you could tutor students privately No big deal. You could pick yourself up a little bit of cash. That would work, no problem. So let me put your fears to rest, Ali. That'll be cool. And good luck with your studying of mathematics and your scholarship at Kyoto. Kyoto is an amazing place. Very, very cool. Okay, so this is then a follow-up question from Dave again. We're getting a 2-for-1 for Dave here. So there's 2 routes I'm thinking about starting. Slacker mode is just to get to Japan and try to be an ALT. B, try to get an international school, was a Spanish teacher, last job that I had. Or C, university, what I do currently, but I hear it's hard due to age and Japanese language skills. My Japanese, I only know, okay, very simple and crude things, which is excellent. That's a good place to start. Basically, I have a master's, a BA in psychology, a BA in Spanish, and a CELTA. You're continually, Dave, you're too worried about your age. I didn't know that you have a master's. You already have the master's, so now this makes it a moot point, what I had said before. So if you got the master's, man, I would suggest coming in, here's how this changes. I would suggest coming in and doing the simplest, low effort job in which you can save and ramp up your Japanese and apply to universities the whole time. Maybe you can find a university gig where the language requirement is a little bit less. Get in there, and in the meantime, you're working on your Japanese and making it that much more likely that you will get something. So yeah, go the university route. If you have a master's, yeah, definitely. Okay. So now we have an email from Malik. Malik says, hello, I recently came across your YouTube videos. Interested in teaching in Japan. I'm a senior high school student learning Japanese at my high school for the past 3.5 years. Right on. Good effort. I'm currently deciding between going to community college or going straight to a 4-year university. I have some of your videos on how much English teachers make, so I was wondering, is it possible to pay off student debts while working as an English teacher? Would it be wiser to first pay off the student debts and then try teaching in Japan at a later time? No, I do not think holding off would be wiser. I think it is only a question of your personal discipline. So if you are a disciplined person, then saving here and paying off your student loans would be no issue, especially if you follow the Dave Trippin handbook of moving your career on up after being here for a not too extended period of time. I would get over here. I would save as much as you needed to, adapt your lifestyle, minimalize your outgoing expenses. You could pay it off, and then within a year, you could be working in a better position. And you can absolutely, when working in a better position, be paying even that much more that it would be gone. And you're accruing experience. So if it is your interest to live here, then you're working in a job that now you're having experience that will give you better jobs, that will give you better jobs, that will give you better jobs. So don't hesitate, Malik. Don't worry that, because I'm of this kind of mindset as well. I'm not really into the astrology thing, but I hear that like apparently Capricorns, which I am, are very like purposeful, and they like a very what would you call, almost like, as much as I embrace the unknown, they like predictable, like reliable investments. You put in the time and you get the results. But knowing that, I wouldn't hesitate to do those two things at once, even for the sort of like very methodical, that's the word I'm looking for, kind of methodical, careful personality type that I am. I think you could do well. All right, this is from Joseph. Hi, Dave. I've been watching for a couple years. Wow. Right on. I have a few questions. Some may pertain to your viewers as a whole, and others not so much. Well, let's check it out. 1. Motorcycles, I love them. I ride them year-round in America. They are economical. How common are they in Japan? And would it make sense to have one versus a car? This would probably be a main method of transportation, even if I came over as a teacher. Interesting question. So, first of all, let me discourage anyone from ever riding a motorbike. Not because they aren't wicked awesome and incredibly economical and wonderful, but just look at the stats, people. You ride one of those and you're gonna die. You're gonna get killed. That said, life is for the living and not to be lived in fear. So if you want to ride one, go straight ahead. And I'll even add to that that I think Japan, the design of the roads is so interesting and winding and narrow and up and down, and like just geographically like a fascinating country that I've often thought that riding a motorbike here would be really, really cool. Now, to answer your question here, Joseph, about what is the culture like here, it's a highly developed culture. The Japanese really, they love motorbikes. I mean, it's no coincidence that many of these car brands are also motorbike brands, and they're making some of the the coolest bikes that are available for you to buy in the world. It's a very, very well developed culture. The one part of the Japanese culture that I do not like, it's I should know this now for the amount that they've annoyed me. It's the nani nani boso, which is basically like motorbike hooligans who ride these god-awful, pathetic little tin cans around. And the whole point, the whole culture behind it is to go around and make noise with your gutless little motorbike. And this area, actually, for some time where I lived, they were around here quite frequently, but they're not any longer. And that's something I'm grateful for now. But to look back on and to have been annoyed by them, is I actually think that's a kind of privilege to have had. So there's a lot for you to digest there, Joseph. Don't ride them. Do ride them. Fascinating place to ride. Fantastic culture. You'll probably die. Not that I wish that on anyone. Okay, so now, number 2. I'll be a paramedic in July and a bachelor's in emergency medicine within the next 2 years. Do you know anything about English speakers in the medical field in Japan? I imagine it requires very high level fluency, but maybe in a very foreigner populated area. I'm going to have to jump this one. I do not know anyone. Actually, I do, but not personally. There was a clinic downtown that one of my friends went to where it was a foreigner running the clinic. That is the extent of my knowledge regarding foreigner participation in the medical networks here. So you stumped me with that one. All right, final note here, number 3. In America, a dream of mine would be to build my own house that is planned out by an architecture team, and then they quote me a price to build it on some land that I have purchased. Doing the same thing in Japan would be the most incredible thing in my opinion. Do you think, do they do this kind of thing in Japan? This would probably require a bit of fluency to really explain what you're looking for in a house, I bet. That's all for now. Okay, that's an awesome question, and I can touch on that from a couple of different angles. So one of the rock star teachers here in the local area that I'm at, he and his wife had their house built in just this way. And in Japan, the land is what is expensive, and not saying that houses are cheap, but they are likely far more affordable than other places in the world. And so not too much money goes a long way. And his house is really, really beautiful, I must say. I've been there a few times. So there are people doing this. It is an affordable thing to do. And especially so if you are living out in the countryside, because more and more year after year, the concentration of people who live in the cities is increasing dramatically, and there are less and less people out here. And so, of course, that incentivizes lower prices and lower cost of construction and that kind of thing. It's a dream that I have one day, from a business perspective, perhaps just as much as a place to live in, but to renovate a machiya, to restore and renovate a machiya in Kyoto and to live there. Definitely with like modern changes made. One specifically is the stairs in machiya will end your life. If you watch the movie, which was so for me. Actually, I enjoyed it thinking about it afterwards, less so or more so than I did actually watching it. It was called Earthquake Bird. And spoiler alert, there's a woman who falls down machiya-like stairs in Earthquake Bird. I was like, that's what's going to happen to me if I don't do a proper renovation before I move into a place like this. But I would love to do it. There's such a there's such an energy to these older buildings, and they, of course, naturally have a history. I love it. I love the idea, just as you've described here, Joseph, of one day designing a house. And I hope to do it where Drew, who's come up frequently in videos and podcasts, will soon feature in another video as I go down to do a sort of documentary of his business development restoring Macchia. He, before he did what he does now, was at Kyoto University actually studying architecture, and so he could offer a great deal of input. And then his friend Kosuke, who's an awesome guy, is actually like who he went on to complete the degree, is an architect. So I could actually do it with some friends here, and I would absolutely love to do that. Even though it's always degrees removed, right? Like, if I have, were I the architect, then it would be really, really cool. But if I can have it only one step removed and I'm there with my friends and they're informing me, and it would be wonderful. I think that would be I know that that's a really cool experience. Okay, nice. That was Joseph. Okay, moving along. See, so many good emails. This is great. All right, this comes from John. Okay. Hey, I hope you are well. I am. Thanks, John. I'm due to come over to Japan in the near future to teach English. I plan on following a lot of your advice. Right on. You're going to stay for the long term, too. That sounds wicked. I'm a music producer by hobby and plan on making this a career once my Japanese language is on point. My question is this. What are the residential noise laws like in Japan? I've heard a lot of people mention that noise is frowned upon, and I'm worried that my side hustle will inconvenience my neighbors and get me into trouble. Are there certain times of the day when it is permitted? Do the walls tend to be thin? Would I be able to play music reasonable levels on my days off or even in the mornings? Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Oh, another interesting question. So everything you said to begin with here, John, yeah, I'd say it's less that it's specifically about music that people are sensitive to, but it's everything. That you would be a good neighbor, is of paramount importance here in Japan, and that you not inconvenience someone in any way, infringe on their privacy in any way is very important. But I say that. I listen to music here, not cranked up in my house, but I love music, and I listen to music frequently here, and it has never created an issue. I've never had a noise complaint before within not cranking the thing up too loud. But I might suggest, now this will be difficult whether it is that you're living in your home or if you are living in a city. Sorry, I said in your home. Of course you're living in your home. If you are living in the countryside versus the city. So in the countryside, you're not going to find any jam spaces. That's going to be tough. But of course, the music industry is a big thing here. And so if you were to live in a city center, finding a jam space, I think, would be advisable. Then while you're at home, you headphone it up, do whatever you need to do. And then if you want to do anything live, test things out in that way, then you could go to one of these jam spaces and work like that. Drew, who I've now mentioned once already, Drew is like quite the musician, crazy drummer, great guitarist, plays bass as well. And Drew is often like performing with bands, and he has hunted down jam spaces in Tokyo that they could play plugged in. So yeah, there's special consideration I think should be given to noise levels when you're in your apartment here, but there are workarounds for this that I think you can find. All right. Let's go. All right, next one. This is from Ashby. Okay, cool. Like the videos and the podcast. Right on. Hey, Ashby. I recently just graduated from the City College in New York. Cool. I want to go to New York. With a bachelor's degree in Asian studies. I have also been rejected from the JET program. Don't sweat it. I'm a little stuck on what to do next. I really want to move and teach English in Japan as an ALT, but I'm a bit lost on how to get my foot in the door. if you could offer advice on what kinds of jobs to apply for and what kind of TEFL certifications, I'd really appreciate it. I've been studying Japanese through AJAT, cool, and memorized about 2,200 kanji. Really? That's incredible if you have. And at City College, I studied Japanese to an intermediate level. That's just awesome. Well done. Good you. If you have any advice, that would be awesome. Okay, so I think the best advice that I can give you is the sort of where I do this brush stroke indiscriminately. If your interest is to be here and that's the priority, indiscriminately apply to these different options that you have available to you. Once you get in, stepping stone, then you can move on to something better. I mean, the worst thing in the world is when people get rejected by JET and then they think that this is like you say, you're lost. It's like you aren't lost at all. There's so many different options that you'll have, and I can't even, not going to even list them here, but just look up dispatch companies, get on Reddit, see what are, actually fine, I will. So you got like Berlitz, Hart, Altia, Eon, Interact, Peppy Kids Club. There you go. There's a list. Go through those. And who cares what they're like? You move on to something better. That's really great, by the way, how you've progressed with your Japanese. Now, something else I would shine a light on here is the question about the TEFL certification, like what matters for that kind of thing. TESOL and TEFL certifications do not matter at the indiscriminate application stage of what it is that you're doing. They will matter if you stay for longer, because I think you said here, did you say you wanted to stay a while? If you stay for a while, then they become relevant, because there are things, check boxes on these higher tier positions where something like a TEFL or a TESOL or a KELTA or whatever else will be sought after and differentiate you from the pack. In fact, I think for the position that I have recently been hired before, I believe it said TESOL required in the application. So there you go. It was needed for what I'm doing now. So there you have it. I hope that was useful, Ashby. Okay. Next, I think we got time. Yeah, we're gonna do one more. Okay. Nice. And this was a question that was lost in the shuffle. This is from Michael. Michael's another patron. Thanks for writing in. Good day, Dave. As you know, I'm a longtime supporter. Yes, you are. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I'm a civil engineering student with a focus in structural engineering in Canada. Hot damn. Sounds like a jobby job, a real job. Within a few years, I will have my bachelor's degree in engineering. Do you think there is any chance of someone like me finding a job engineering in Japan? I understand I would probably need N2 level to work in a Japanese company, but do you know if engineering companies hire engineers from abroad? I plan on visiting Japan in the next few years and have a feeling that I will want to go back for more. There's nothing wrong with applying to be a teacher, but I would love to work in my field. Yeah, be an engineer. Yeah, I would say actually like your concern here, Michael, is it's unnecessary. Because engineering is such a skilled profession, I think you would find jobs available in international companies here, and you could search on like Glassdoor.com for this kind of thing. But in addition to that, there's such a major push, and this will only pick up speed in the coming years, to internationalize Japanese companies to be integrated with the global economy, that with N2 is straight up fluent. If you can get that N2, aside from some outliers who like all they've done is study, they've never spoke. If you can speak N2, then you are fluent. There are lots of companies that at an N3 level would allow you to be in the country. And people who are N3 are fluent, with that note up at the end. So I think that you're being far too hard on yourself, and I don't want to give you too much of an easy pass here, but structural engineers, by virtue of the education you've gotten for yourself, are going to not struggle so much to find employment, I think, no matter where you are in the world. So don't sweat it. Definitely focus on increasing your Japanese, because what's wrong with more doors opening to you? But I would really start to inquire. There's your foothold. Inquire into the companies that are working internationally in Japan and see about their programs. There's lots of international companies that are doing stuff over here. And if there's somebody, in fact, I think it's probably easier to get into these positions, because if you're a structural engineer and you're able to do that in your home country, then it's probably hard for them to find somebody like, we need a structural engineer, but who wants to go to Japan? Oh, Michael. Okay, perfect. Send him. So I don't think there's a long line of structural engineers that you would be competing with, because usually structural engineers can stay in their own country. So whether it's an international company or a Japanese company, I think that there's a great chance in succeeding in this mission. And you should absolutely pursue it. Right then. So we hammered our way through a good, must be near 10 different emails there. And that's awesome. And I'll say again, as we finish up now, write me at davetrippingon@gmail.com. I loved getting all of these emails. It breathes such life and personality into the podcast. And as I was saying, as a special note, if you're paying attention here, it's great as well if you can write where you're from. I know we got some sense of that a lot of the time, but I want to specifically say it because that's really, really cool. I love seeing kind of like where is the channel reaching out to in the world. Really, really fascinating for me. I appreciate so much you taking the time to listen to this today or tonight, wherever you are. If you're watching on the channel, please do leave a like, maybe subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that bell notification if you want to get these as soon as they go live. It means a great deal to me, and I truly appreciate if you would consider supporting me on Patreon. This has been a lot of fun recording this. Thanks again. The clock has run out.